Okay, today is September 4th, 2024. I am Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, as always, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
Good afternoon again.
Good afternoon. And Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan.
Always a pleasure.
I always say, we got a good show for you, but today I really mean it. We had zero trouble coming up with the topics today. In fact, the biggest top story, the main story we're going to lead off at the top, it just broke as we were coming up with our agenda for today, Nigel. And we'll be starting to show off with Jagmeet and Justin breakup. That's right. The formal coalition agreement between Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party and Jagmeet Singh's NDP is over. Huge news. Are we headed to an early election? God, I hope so. We'll discuss. And BC United. Remember, the BC Liberals became BC United? Well, BC is now united, but under the Conservative Party. They ran up the white flag, folded like a cheap tent, but ultimately probably did the right thing for British Columbia and the Conservative movement, and very unprecedented, just stood down. And through their support behind the BC Conservatives, absolute earthquake in BC political news that's going to have national ramifications. Speaking of national ramifications, Justin Trudeau has appointed two very un-Albertans to represent Alberta in the Senate. Christopher Wells, a activist whose time is mostly spent pushing puberty blockers on children and ensuring that men can go into the same washroom as women and play in the same sports league as them. He will be representing Alberta in the Senate alongside Derek Fildebrandt, who is most notable for donating lots of money to the Liberal Party. They will take their spots in the Chamber of Sober Second Thought over the two conservative women who were elected to that position not that long ago. And if we have time, we're going to get into a very important thing going on. Justin Trudeau's big 100% tariff to protect electronic vehicle manufacturing that is already subsidized by the federal government in Ontario, and a 25% tariff against Chinese steel. Inevitably has drawn a huge backlash from the Chinese, as one would expect. But they're not going after EVs. They're going after Western canola farmers. Almost all the canola in Canada is produced here in the West, and that is where the consequences of this policy designed to protect Eastern EV manufacturing has fallen. I don't know why Justin just doesn't call him some favors to his friends. I mean, they're happy to help keep him in power. They're happy to send guys to help him win re-election. I don't know why they just don't sort this out like gentlemen. Okay. So let's get into our big top story. Nigel, you and I were sitting in the boardroom this morning talking, figuring out what are we going to talk about on the pipeline today. And we had most of the show figured out. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, our news editor, Dave Naylor, piped in and says, Jagmeet just pulled the plug on Trudeau. Now, that's not necessarily true. He's pulled the plug on what they technically call the confidence and supply agreement, effectively building a coalition government for all intents and purposes, that gave the Liberals essentially long hold on power in exchange for certain policy goodies, most of which come with a very high price tag. Before we get into where this is going to go, let's not talk about election, the next election yet, if they're going to get to an early election. But maybe your first thoughts on why Jagmeet Singh felt the need to pull the plug, at least on the formal coalition agreement between his NDP and the Liberals.
Well, Derek, he knows there is an election coming no later than October next year. What he has done since March of 2022, when the confidence and supply arrangement that you speak of came into effect, is keep afloat a government that nobody likes. Even he doesn't like it.
Yeah, he says he does.
And he's so cheap. He probably doesn't like it. I mean, here's a guy who's sold his political soul, and what has he got for it? A dental program that serves the needs of 500,000 very low-income Canadians, and he doesn't even get the credit for it. The Liberals the Liberals are saying. I think you made a point in your own column today that he's sitting on the side saying, hey, that was actually me. Well, he doesn't get the credit for that or anything else that has happened that he has made possible. Now, at some point, he's got to face his own voters, and he's got to say, I split. Finally, I did the right thing when there was no other option. I did the right thing, and I'm not really like Mr. Trudeau at all, even though I kept him from. To leave it any later would make it impossible even to say that little bit of an excuse. So it had to come. It came.
Cory, I mean, they had in their supply and confidence / coalition agreement, there was a bunch of goodies. I mean, the NDP, they can promise the world. They never really have to worry about delivering anything because they know they're not going to win federally. But I mean, they were promised a lot in this, and they got a lot. They got unrestricted mass migration. We have had insane levels of unrestricted, unverified mass migration coming into Canada. That's something the NDP wanted. It's something they got. They got new social welfare programs. Maybe not as big and far along the implementation as they like, but they got them. And they got new higher taxes, carbon taxes, capital gains taxes. These are all things they wanted. And then more debt to pay for it all. They got a lot. There's a lot of policy from the left's perspective. There's a lot of policy achievements to plant their flag on here. Why would Singh pull the plug right now?
Well, part of his problem too, though, was Labour. The Labour wing of the party is not happy with the Liberals or with Singh. I mean, we can't forget that the Liberals just imposed binding arbitration on that rail strike with the Teamsters, and the Teamsters are not happy at all with that. Well, Singh has to wear some of that because he's propping up this government. He can keep wagging his finger at Justin Trudeau and saying it's intolerable, but, well, you've got the power, Jagmeet. You can stop this any time you please. He can only keep drawing lines in the sand and jumping back over them so many times. So, I mean, that's part of where the problem's coming in. Another part is, the NDP support mass migration, but trade unions aren't so thrilled with it. They aren't so happy with these jobs coming in, and that's the only wing left for the NDP.
Well, it dilutes the negotiating power for lower wage people when there's always someone cheaper to do the job for you.
Oh yeah, and Justin Trudeau has owned the left. I mean, he's taken it. He has shifted left. He hasn't had to have his arm twisted that hard to bring in a dental plan and daycare and lunch programs for schools and all the other stuff he's constantly announcing. So where does the NDP retreat to? What can they do anymore? Well, they supposedly, ostensibly, are the Labour Party, and Labour just got stepped all over. So he's got to, and I still think he's just posturing, but he's got to do some more posturing right now because the union leaders, I'm sure, are calling him up saying, like, what good are you, Mr. Singh?
And he's got a caucus retreat coming up in about 2 weeks, is it? And a by-election in Winnipeg
and Montreal.
And in Montreal. Well, I don't think the Montreal one is what's on his mind, but there's a real tight fight in Elmwood, Strathcona in Winnipeg.
No, well, Montreal's tight too, but it's a three-way between the Liberals, NDP, and the Bloc.
He actually owns the one in Winnipeg at the moment. If he loses that, that's going to look bad on him, and this is a step in I guess, in rallying the troops.
So how much? So okay, Pierre Poilievre, he's been a bit you can see this, for lack of a better term, the shit-eating grin on his face as he taunts Jagmeet Singh, calling him sellout Singh, saying the reason you're still working for Trudeau, the reason you're not willing to vote non-confidence and trigger an election to get rid of this guy is because you sold out. You're waiting on your pension. You're waiting for your pension to vest. And that is, Liberals were very smart. They moved the election back 1 week for all their guys to vest in their pension. And Jagmeet Singh, very smart, because if they wait till that fixed election date, they all get their big pension. I mean, can you imagine you've served 6 years in Parliament and you're short 1 week from that sweet pension? I mean, doesn't matter your politics. You gotta be pissed at that.
And it doesn't matter your politics. There are about 80 members of Parliament to whom this applies from all parties.
Yes. Now, the Conservatives aren't worried about it because every single Conservative is extremely likely to win their seats back. The Bloc, not all of them, but most of them. but the Liberals and the NDP, a bunch of them are going to lose, and their pensions are on the line. So it applies across parties, but it really only matters if you're going to lose your seat. If you're going to win your seat, you're fine. But so Poilievre has been kind of twisting the knife, calling him sellouts, saying this is about his pension and whatnot. Start with you, Corey. Is that fair? And do you think that it really got under his skin? Do you think that was that a major reason for saying breaking off their formal agreement with the Liberals now, or was it everything else we've already been discussing?
Well, I think it was everything else, but that adds to it. I mean, and I don't know if it's necessarily fair, but it's effective, and it's getting under his skin. There's no doubt about it. Because to be honest, and a lot of people have that discussion, I don't think Singh's himself, anyways, is that motivated by the pension. It's a rich one.
But he's going to win a seat. His own seat. He's going to win it.
Yeah, and he's already rich. He's the Rolex leader of the socialists.
He wears 2 Rolexes.
Yeah, his wife sits on the $20,000 breastfeeding chairs or whatever other stuff they've done. The pension, I mean, I'm certain he doesn't want to turn away money, but he's not hard pressed no matter how you look at it. So I'm sure that has to be actually all the more galling when that's not part of your motivation for this, but you got to sit there and keep taking that needle in.
And what's he going to say to his own voters? I don't need it. I'm already rich. Yeah. Are you really going to say that as the NDP socialist leader?
So it's an effective way to get under his skin. I mean, how good at politicking in general it is for Poilievre, I don't know. But that's been kind of his style. It always has been. Even when he wasn't leading the party, he was the badgering, pestering opposition member who would really get on them in committees and things. So he's just turned his sights at Singh, and Singh's vulnerable.
Okay, so let's turn now towards what's going to come from this. My best bet, as I wrote my column this morning, is that on the very first day that Parliament comes back this fall, Pierre Poilievre is going to stand up, take one look at Trudeau, and he's going to take another look down the aisle a bit at Singh, and he's going to table a motion of non-confidence. And he's going to look Singh in the eye the whole time he does it and say, you say you're done your agreement with Trudeau? Let's see how serious you are. Stand up and be counted. Let's have a vote of non-confidence. Nigel, where do you think that would go? Because I think it's good money. First day of Parliament, we're getting a non-confidence motion tabled by Poilievre. Does Singh pick up the bait?
No, not in the slightest chance will he pick up the bait. He cannot afford to. There is no money in the NDP. They have only just finished paying off the $22 million that they borrowed to fight the 2021 election. The contributions to the party have been contaminated by the confidence and supply agreement. NDP supporters don't like it. They have taken in something like $6.9 million in the first 2 quarters of this year, which is nothing. The Conservatives have taken in $20.5 million, and the Liberals about half of that. The same pattern repeats in 2023. The people, the supporters, are not stepping up to the plate to pay for it. So he has no money to fight, and even if he borrows again, he starts from a situation where in the polls they are way, way down. So they are not popular, and there are all sorts of good reasons for it, which we've just gone over. So I think that he will actually stretch this out as long as he possibly can, and possibly all the way until October of next year, all the while saying, well, we're with you on this, or with you on that. If Mr. Trudeau really wants an election, he'll have to put out something that Mr. Singh can't support.
Well, and we know Justin Trudeau most certainly does not want an election right now. He would get utterly nuked by Poilievre. And I think there's a few other reasons why, if I was Jagmeet Singh, I would not trigger an election. Yeah, it's embarrassing. Yeah, you have to walk around with your tail between your legs. But what's the old saying? That discretion is a better part of valor. And right now, I think that really applies to Jagmeet Singh. If I was advising Jagmeet Singh, I'd say, sir, you would be crazy to do it. They're probably going to lose some seats. The NDP is roughly equal to where they were in the polls in the last election, maybe ever so slightly down, but they're about where they were. But the Conservatives are so much higher, having sucked up half the Liberal vote nearly, that, a little less, I'd say 40% of the Liberal vote, that they're not just going to take seats from the Liberals, they're going to take seats from the NDP as well. So the NDP is going to lose seats. And very importantly, they're going to lose all their influence. So even without their supply and confidence coalition agreement, they're still the unofficial junior partner to the Liberals in Parliament. They have influence. Justin Trudeau does not want an election, so he's got to keep the NDP happy. Well, if there's an election with a high degree of probability, there's going to be a massive majority Conservative government. And the NDP will have zero influence in that. All they'll be able to do is sit in the cheap seats of Parliament and scream, "Please stop. For the love of God, please stop." And they're going to watch in the first few months of a Poilievre government as he essentially legislates away everything they achieved with Justin Trudeau from their perspective.
If he can get it past the Senate, which
True. Although
we'll come to that. But,
yeah. Well, there's ways. You essentially you load everything into the budget. You essentially only do budgets because the Senate can't kill budgets. Yeah. You just put everything into a budget.
A big omnibus bill.
Senate can't kill budgets. That's the one rule. That's probably the one real way around the Senate is put money bills into every piece of legislation you do, so the Senate can't kill it. That's an interesting thought for writing there. Remind me to bring that to me after. Let's do some writing on that. So Cory, is there any good reason for Trudeau for Singh to pull the plug? We've talked about all the negatives, but why, from his perspective, he probably shouldn't. Why he probably won't. Is there anything in the plus column?
There's none. There really is none. He's been riding with Trudeau so long, and Trudeau's support has collapsed, and he's collapsed along with it. They haven't been able to capitalize from the Liberal, unpopularity. If he'd have been at some degree of separation from the Liberals, perhaps, even if Trudeau is losing popularity, some of that would drift to the NDP, but it hasn't. And, the formula for pulling the pin on a parliament means, whether we like it or not for the good of the country, it's what's the good of your party. Yeah. And there's just absolutely nothing on the plus side of the column for Singh to look at and say, this would be a good idea. I mean, there's no chance, at least as things look right now, that, that they would gain seats unless there was some sort of phenomenal campaign they held. As much as he is going to be galling to sit for this next year and constantly just talk big and act weak, it's still better than going to the polls at this point and just, as you said, losing seats. There's no reason for him to go. So he's going to talk a lot, but I'll be pretty darn shocked if he ever actually.
Now, there is this thing to mention that we sit here and we work it out and we parse it out and we think, well, if this, then that, doesn't make any sense, won't happen. But sometimes accidents do happen.
We've been wrong before. We can't get into his mind necessarily.
It is actually very, very close. If you look at the seat distribution, Liberals have got 154, the Conservatives have got 119. The Bloc Québécois would be enough to do it. You just need one Liberal member of Parliament taken to hospital with the symptoms of a heart attack and another one stuck in traffic, and then you are down to the situation where when the bells goes, they lose by one vote. These things don't happen very often, but they have happened. So all of our speculation here, which I think is right, I don't think there will be an election for all the reasons that Cory has advanced and that you have talked about. It could still happen by accident.
Okay. Well, speaking of by accident, let's try to make some sense of what the hell has been going on in British Columbia. For the longest time, BC politics has been utterly uninteresting to me, and I think to most people outside of BC, maybe even most people in BC. You had the Left Party, and then you had the BC Liberals, which on some days were a center-right party, on some days a center-left party. You didn't have any real big disagreement between the major parties since at least Gordon Campbell. Gordon Campbell's first two terms were, I think, definitively on the center-right, kind of in the Mike Harris, almost Ralph Klein mold that you saw coming through the, I guess he was picking up at the very end of it, but coming out of the late 90s, early 2000s. And, Christy Clark had her moments, but no one would call her a conservative standard bearer by any measure. You had John Rustad. Did I say that right?
Rustad.
Mm-hmm. So I keep on saying Brunstad, but it's Rustad.
It's the German.
Yes. John Rustad, kicked out by Kevin Falcon for disagreeing with orthodoxy around global warming. And boy, oh boy, did that turn out to be one bad decision. I mean, if you could point to one, where did the butterfly flap its wings that created the hurricane? It was Kevin Falcon kicking John Rustad out of the BC Liberals/BC United caucus, and there's many reasons. I mean, confusing brand changes. It all goes from disaster to disaster, and it culminated last week with the formal, effectively nearly unconditional abdication of the BC United Liberals to the Conservatives. So we now have a BC United Party, just not very much in the fashion that Kevin Falcon and the BC United expected. So essentially, they're not formally abolishing the party, at least not quite yet. It's just standing down. They're suspending the campaign. They're not going to run candidates. I mean, so I suppose if the Conservatives were to lose the election, BC United could revive itself after the next election, at least on paper, but it would have a hard time at that point with no MLAs. Start with you, Nigel. You've written on this. Does this mean it's completely in the bag for the Conservatives, or does this just give the Conservatives maybe the edge over the NDP?
The latter. For all the reasons that I was saying about the other situation, accidents happen. You never know what's going to happen in an election campaign. Somebody could, an uncomfortable truth could be produced about somebody that just changes voter perceptions. The so-called bozo eruption. You have an inexperienced slate of candidates there in the Conservatives. In some are experienced. They're already MLAs, but there's a lot of people who haven't really learned how to campaign. So I would never say it's in the bag, but it definitely, they definitely have the edge on the NDP at this moment, because the NDP has done so many things that have made people so angry. Let me name just a couple. This whole safe supply thing. We don't have that issue here in Alberta, but in BC, people are absolutely furious that a drug addict ends up in hospital and the nurse is obliged to provide him with his pipe and whatever goes with it. That's a huge one. Another one is the sort of abandonment of provincial authority, essentially to native interests, giving away the land. I mean, you can have that discussion as whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. What is clear is that people don't like it. The NDP has put BC in the kind of debt that it has never seen before. Again, that people understand that. They feel the ramifications of it in the tax bill. So there is a tremendous amount of disgust, disappointment, and despair over the NDP. And David Eby, the man who became premier after John Horgan, is not John Horgan. Horgan, he was NDP, probably didn't agree with him on a lot of things, but he was actually not a bad sort of guy. If you were to fortuitously arrive, see him walking past the window, then come in and sit down at this table, you would enjoy John Horgan, but you would not enjoy David Eby in the same way. So the NDP have got a lot against them. Rustad doesn't have much baggage. When you're a new party, you have that luxury. And there is something appealing about somebody who gets kicked out of the party because he doesn't follow the bromide of the day, in this case about global warming, and sort of comes back and does a reverse takeover. People say, hey, that's kind of cute. I like that.
Everyone kind of fantasizes about getting kicked,
it's the
fired by your
coming,
boss, then you come back, you become the boss and fire him.
Well, it's the 7 Stone Weekly who put muscles up with the Charles Atlas program. It's I don't know whether that's a relevant cultural reference these days, but at any rate, he's the comeback kid, and a lot of people will find that appealing. So the short answer, yeah, they're in with a good chance. I'm having, part of me thinks like, you're sticking it to Kevin Falcon. He had it coming. He kicked this guy out for no good reason, and now he is given his abject, total political surrender.
But there's also part of me that thinks Kevin Falcon did the noble thing here, for the because, you know, I'm generally I like political diversity where there's actual differences between the parties. But the BC United / BC Liberals exists or existed for one reason and one reason only, and that is the traditional BC role of British Columbia's Stop the Socialist Party. And you know, I think we talked about this last. We talked about this many times before. It's taken the form of the Conservatives a long time ago, and then it took the form of Social Credit, and then it took the form of the Liberals, and now it's taking the form of the Conservatives again. The Conservatives are just a much more robust version of it than, say, the Liberals were. This is more in line with maybe the earlier Liberals or versions of Social Credit, Van der Zam, guys like that. The BC United Liberal Party existed only for the sole purpose of keeping the NDP out. Its continued existence was working to achieve the exact opposite of its stated purpose of existence. So how do you think history is going to look at Kevin Falcon here? And let's just say, for argument's sake, the Conservatives do win, because I'd say at this point I'd favor them to win. Not slam dunk, but I'm making a bet. I'm going to say it's probably Conservatives. Is it going to view him as this hapless disaster of a leader who tried to kill their leader and was, you know, had to surrender in humiliation on the way out, or the man who, yeah, maybe screwed up, but did the right thing to help defeat the socialists? How do you think history of BC is going to remember Kevin Falcon?
I think for the most part, people won't remember him at all. Well, it's not saying he's a. He hasn't been in that terribly long. And it was a lackluster leadership. He did step in it. I mean, people currently are saying thank you for taking one for the team, because this was putting a real risk of putting the NDP back in. But realistically, they still kind of in the back of their minds are saying, but you put us here in the first bloody place to begin with. So I noticed he stepped right out too. He said, you know, I'm not running. I'm not doing it. I'm gone. I'm done. I can imagine there's been some backroom discussions. I remember when the Wild Rose and the Alberta Alliance came together, and I was on the board back then. It took till our donors basically were smacking our heads together saying, you're not getting any money. You're not getting any support unless you get it together. We're not telling you how to do it. We're just saying do it or you're broke. And I'm certain the discussions got to that point in BC. It wasn't a point of principle, I think, so much with Falcon to step aside. It was a realization that it still would look better doing this now than going into an election, getting obliterated, but being known as the spoiler who put the NDP back in for 4 more years. So he's not to be too cruel, but I think he's going to be viewed as a political blip, a footnote for political wonks like us, but people in general, he just kind of came and went. I think in large measure, you're right. I mean, he had no choice, but I think to surrender, but to actually do it. I've never seen anything like. Some people have tried to compare it to Danielle Smith's floor crossing from the Wild Rose of the PCs in December 2014. It doesn't hold up there. There was no gain for him here. He lost his leadership. He's not even running as an MLA. He can't. I mean, what's he going to do? Sit as a backbencher in Rudsted's caucus after he kicked Rudstead out? He came back and ate him alive. I think he did do the right thing, and I think he did do it in large measure for the right reasons. But I think he also did it at the end of the road. There was nowhere left to go. They were looking at 0 seats, and he helped at the very least save some of his colleagues' seats. So part of this, it's not that the reason I said earlier it was a nearly unconditional surrender is because there does seem to have been some conditions. The BC Conservatives have reopened their nominations, and that is to allow some of these BC United Liberals to come over and sit. Keep your incumbents if you can get them.
Yeah. Now, they're not taking all of them because some of them are real liberals, real liberals that probably don't belong in the BC Conservative Party. But, some of them probably do belong in there, and they want to bring them along. And that's tough for people who won nominations to be the BC Conservative candidate. And all of a sudden, the leader's saying, hey, in the name of the greater good, I'm sorry, you got to go. We're making room for the BC United Liberal candidate that you were opposed to just 24 hours ago. That's tough. So the BC Conservatives are swallowing some here. in order for Kevin Falcon to be able to say with a straight face, they said they're going to improve their vetting process because, they were going after some BC Conservative candidates that maybe said some embarrassing things. And, Corey and I, we came from Wild Rose. In tough times, it's hard to do a thorough vetting of all your candidates. So when you're small and you don't have huge resources to put a private investigator to go through the toilet paper of every candidate, you can end up with some.
As Nigel said, there's still some room for some eruptions. You can imagine there's probably already knowledge on the part of the BC NDP, but they're keeping their powder dry. You don't blow these guys up now. You wait until 2 weeks before elections. You wait until the advanced polls are about to open.
Actually, they already pitched out the opening shot. They said, Mr. Rustad, you should fire everyone who supported the convoy.
Yeah, and that's a beginning. But there's gonna be some gems. There's gonna be somebody who tweeted something truly,
But the Conservatives did put some water in their wine here. I mean, a hell of a lot less than the BC United Liberals. They drank the poison, but the Conservatives put some water in their wine, and it seems to be a good deal for them. They've got them out of the way. All right. Well, let's. Speaking of elections, let's talk about some of the only politicians in the civilized world who were not elected in what are nominally a democracy. Canadian senators. So just the other week, Justin Trudeau appointed the very nonpartisan, totally not anti-conservative liberal Charles Adler to the Senate to represent Manitoba. Well, Manitoba does not hold Senate elections, so whatever, you get to appoint whoever you want. But it just sticks, I think, under all of our clause a bit that Justin Trudeau has the gall to call these people independent, that they're not anything but his servants. But boy, he really went out of his way in Alberta. He appointed people who could not get elected dog catcher in Alberta. First was Daryl Finhandler. If you haven't heard of him, that's okay. Nobody else has as well, except for whoever's keeping the roll call list of Liberal donors in Alberta. This guy is notable only for making some substantial financial contributions to the Liberal Party. Now, to be fair, that is the single oldest criteria for getting appointed to the Senate in Canadian history. It started with Sir John A. Macdonald. Give the Conservatives a little cash for Sir John A. Good chance you're good. You've really improved your chances of a Senate seat. So that's not a new thing. That's a long and proud Canadian tradition of corruption, and it goes right back to our beginning. But again, obviously not very independent, not very nonpartisan. But the real one, I think the one that we all like talking about, is Christopher Wells. Now, Christopher Wells has got some BS job at a BS university. I'm not sure if it's fair to call them all BS, but it's certainly his department. It's a BS department at the university, and he's got a BS role there. He's the head of gender studies and various. Have you got his formal job title there?
Yeah, I might. Dr. Wells is the associate professor in the Department of Child and Youth Care at MacEwan University. He holds MacEwan's first Canada Research Chair for the public understanding of sexual and gender minority youth. He is an adjunct professor in the Department of Psychiatry. He founded the MacEwan Center for Sexual and Gender Diversity. There is more, but I think that gives the flavor.
We get the point.
There is considerably more, actually.
So this guy, unfortunately, like many people in this area, went well beyond the perfectly reasonable demands of the gay rights movement for equality. He's left that long behind him. He has long since moved on to kind of well beyond the bake my cake or go to jail or I'll sue you phase. He is in the your children should be allowed to transition genders and sexes, and the parents shouldn't know. That puberty blockers should be available to young children, and the parents should know or have anything to do with it. That men should be allowed to play on women's sports teams, and that men should be allowed in the same change rooms as biological females. That appears to be, those are the highlights of his career. That is what he's known for. The legacy mainstream media paid for by Justin Trudeau quote him ad nauseum anytime anything comes up, quoting him with extreme reverence when Danielle Smith announced that Alberta is going to restrict the use of puberty blockers for young children and that men will not be allowed to play on women's sports teams. He came out and I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I think I'm not going on a limb to say, he said, this is going to kill people. You're trying to kill LGBTQ plus ABC XY youth. This man is an extremist, and Justin Trudeau found him perfectly suitable to be appointed to the Senate.
Yes. He is also the author of a book, How to Form a Gay-Straight Alliance, which has been endorsed and issued by the Alberta Teachers Association, which seems to very much reflect his views in these matters.
Well, I don't even really care much about gay-straight alliances. They're a kid's club. My only problem there was the obsessive need for secrecy, to hide everything from parents. Which, once upon a time, I was sympathetic to the argument that, okay, well, some kids might not be welcome at home if, they come out as gay or something. But then the obsession with secrecy around this stuff just started to get a little too fishy for me now. And I just don't trust activists like this. Nigel, you called this a very deliberate insult to Albertans, his appointment.
Well, I did. And the reason that I did so was that Premier Smith has taken what I think is a widely supported position with regard to gender transition. She has said that children 17 years old and under will not be able to do this. They won't take the puberty blockers. They won't get the surgery. And that recognizes that when they are adults, if that's what they want to do, they can do it. But as she said when she made the original announcement, that period of life is one when people often are quite confused and mixed up, and the job is to get them through it. Later, if they are determined, then they can do it. Mm-hmm. So this, of course, is anathema to people who think in the manner of Dr. Wells. They feel and have been actively pursuing, and that's a little bit part where these gay-straight alliances led to, the idea that there was a secret life that a child could have, and that the parents didn't have a right to know, and that the state could become in place of the parents and permit and allow these surgeries and these puberty blockers to be issued. So she's drawn that line in the sand. That is a direct throwing, mixing the metaphors a little. Then she threw the gauntlet across it. So she has challenged this whole way of thinking in Alberta's academic establishment. Well, Mr. Trudeau obviously is not a fan of our premier, and has said, I'll show you. Here, have him for a senator. It would be like taking a very activist Roman Catholic nun, strongly pro-life, and making her a senator in Quebec. How do you think that, how do you think that the Quebec people who are, and I'm not saying they're all pro-choice, but they certainly, generally speaking, religion is on the downswing in Quebec. Why that person does not represent who I am, what I think, and it doesn't represent my interests. And I think when Dr. Wells comes up against the Alberta interests, which are principally energy security, and the canola fight we're about to have, he doesn't have a clue. That's not his file. So he's not a representative. And that's why I call him out on it.
Cory, your show earlier today, I didn't catch it yet. I'll have to watch it a rerun. But you interviewed Senator-in-Waiting Erica Barutz, who was democratically elected by the people of Alberta, I think, to be number 2 on the list of senators in waiting. I'm sure she found the choice of this very extreme activist man to be curious, to be appointed over her, who was elected. I thought it was 2015.
What's that? When she was
Because it's
elected?
2015, you know.
Oh, yeah. Women get, got to be half of the
What
Senate.
happened to appointing women? Perhaps the two that are
I see what
elected,
you're saying, yes.
rather than these extreme men who are wildly offside with even the middle of public opinion in Alberta.
He certainly wasn't looking for gender parity. She also pointed out, though, the prior appointment to the Senate, though, was a woman that Trudeau did. He made a point of doing it during our Senate election. In the middle of the campaign, he picked out Liberal Karen Sorensen, slapped a coat of independent paint on her, and said, "This is your new senator in Alberta. You guys are all wasting your time on this election." This is just another opportunity for him to do like his father did and give the finger to the West. And that's what this is. He's using the Senate to basically say, up yours, I don't care what you think. And I'm going to show you how I don't care what you think by picking senators who are truly the opposite of what the majority of your province wants to see representing you. I mean, Eric Baruti didn't seem surprised at all by this. I mean, they go into it knowing their chances of being appointed by a Liberal government are pretty much slim to none. The other thing that was noteworthy, though, is that those seats had been vacant for years. This isn't something that he needed to do. Well, that adds another element to it. Maybe he is worried about the security of his government when he's starting to fill these seats, when he's taken years leaving them vacant.
Well, one of the biggest mistakes of Stephen Harper was leaving so many vacancies at the end of his prime ministership to be filled by Justin Trudeau.
But the Senate's just such a sick and abused institution from many governments, not just the Liberals, actually, that it's just a rotten system. This appointment system's terrible.
Sick and abused, yes, but it still has powers.
Yes.
I want to draw attention to a column that came in from one of our columnists. We published it earlier this morning, in which this is John Hilton O'Brien, and he makes the point that the Senate is not without power. We think it is just a rubber stamp, but in actual fact, it does two things. One is that it gives its members credibility, and now Dr. Wells can put on his business card, Senator of Canada. People will listen to him in a way that they would not have listened to him when he was just the adjunct professor of who knows what at McEwen. Where? Oh, Alberta. You know, like he didn't have much clout. But with this, if he wants to challenge the findings, shall we say, and this is the point that our columnist is making, the Cass report in Great Britain poured a lot of cold water on this whole matter of gender transition in teenagers. Well, he's now in a position to say, oh, no, they got it completely wrong. And he has the credibility of the Canadian Senate behind him to do so, which will be enough for some people to say, oh, well, the Canadian senator says. The other thing he could do, I mean, it's not out of the question that he could have a private member's bill that would impinge on this matter. Don't forget, we think that these certain things are provincial jurisdictions. But, you know, the federal government moved in on health. And what was once a provincial jurisdiction got mixed up in federal
They're even
politics.
trying to make school lunches now. They recognize no boundaries.
So exactly. So somebody with that, driven by those priorities, seated in the Senate, is in a position to make all kinds of messy trouble that we're not going to enjoy. So read John Hilton O'Brien. Read it.
Right on. I wish we had time to get to our last piece, which is, you know, Trudeau has been shoveling tens and tens of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money at subsidizing useless electric vehicle plants in Ontario, and apparently not for the environment, just make work projects, really, as we've seen, because then he slapped 100% tariff on electronic vehicles coming from China. You know, not a lot of big government of China fans around the Western Standard offices here, but we do trade with them. And I mean, we would expect very much, everyone expected they were going to retaliate. And so now they're investigating what they call illegal dumping of Canadian canola into China. Essentially, it's a prelude for them to respond with the tariffs against our canola, which, I mean, of course, to protect an Eastern industry, which is already subsidized by Western tax dollars, the West is going to pay the price. Western Canadian canola farmers are going to pay the retaliatory trade price for protecting these BS vehicles made in Ontario that nobody wants to drive, paid for by taxpayers.
Welcome to Canada. History repeats. I mean, farmers used to have to pay to get implements shipped from the East because the tariffs stopped buying them from the United States. Then they'd pay their taxes into the East. Then they'd pay the shipping for those implements out here and pay the shipping to send the crop to the East so they could sell it and make the profit.
It's like the old national policy.
It doesn't change.
It doesn't change. Unfortunately, we don't have time to jump into it, but I just want to put it on the record that our poor Western canola farmers they're gonna get it hard, I think, and it's all going to be. Thankfully, if you're a Western Canadian canola farmer right now, just know that your sacrifice is worth it, so that some Liberal voter in Ontario can work at their subsidized electronic vehicle plant to make cars that nobody wants to drive. So that's it for there, gentlemen. Thank you for joining, and thank all of you for joining us today. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, I would say get off your seat. You don't have to get off your seat. You're already on it. Just pick up your phone, pick up your laptop right now, go to westernstandard.news and become a member. It's only $100 a year or just $10 a month for unlimited access to all Western Standard content. The Western Standard is one of an extremely small number of publications in Canada that are not accepting Justin Trudeau's big media bailout. We are supported by advertising and by membership subscriptions from people like you. We need you to step up and support us to continue our work. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.
If the name Ted Byfield brings back fond memories, well, we got a party coming up for you guys. On September 25th, Toasting Ted is what it's called. It's going to honor a great conservative who published Alberta Report news magazine. It's going to be bagpipes, singing, live auction stakes, speeches by Premier Smith, Preston Manning, Stephen Harper, quite a lineup. The Western Standard is the final incarnation or the latest incarnation of Alberta Report that Ted Byfield founded. And I mean, he was a great Albertan. He really made his mark on this province. And this evening of celebration for him is really going to be outstanding. You get there, toastingted.ca. That's the website. You can get your tickets. This one's going to sell out. I mean, again, if you want to see Smith, Manning, Harper, all in one spot, one night, be sure to get there.
You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited